Hello, everyone, and welcome to the April 2nd Product Analytics Group Sync. We're going to do things a little bit differently since we're a little later into the milestone and we're working on GA for 1611. If we have time, we can go to the Billboard review, but I imagine we'll probably go through a lot of the issues here. But I would prefer to use the time, at least in the beginning of the meeting, to discuss where we're at with GA. Max, you have a couple of points, I think, that covers most of what I'm curious about.
Awesome.
Would you like to carry it?
Sure. Yeah, so me and Rob had a chat earlier. It was a coffee chat that turns into a work chat, as they always do. I'm trying to figure out what the dependencies are engineering-wise anyway, what can be done now, what can't be done now. The short version is that the production billing SKUs are kind of our biggest blocker, or at least remove a lot of the flexibility we have around what we can merge now in terms of enabling feature flags. Like right now, if we enable all of the feature flags we've got by default, we're going to be in a position where people can essentially use product analytics without paying for it, which is presumably not what we want. So my first question is that okay? And if not, is having those billing SKUs functional in production a hard requirement for GA? To which I assume the answer is yes, but Dennis, please tell me if I'm wrong.
Yeah, so I just wanted to clarify that. I mean, ultimately, that is our goal for GA. Like, that is when we're fully, like, completely GA, but that is a lot of that's not in our control. And as an approval chain, that's not like there's not much we can do at this point other than, at least for me, I can just keep bothering Sam to keep bothering people about it. But that's pretty much where we're at. I just want to remind people, like, remind the group that like the GA is tiered, so the focus is on bringing your own cluster. Um, but you will see in the OKR that yes, we are trying to get to both, but the focus should be on bring your own cluster. So to answer your question, um, and I guess my follow-up is like if we can have that feature flag, even if the SKUs aren't there, at least to set up the right access checks, then that would be preferable because I think that benefits the bring your own cluster GA.
Yeah. So it sounds like what we want is a way of uh, if we enable all the flags except for the billing one, then we should be allowing access to bring your own cluster, and then only enable the billing one once we have those SKUs. Okay. That's doable, but it might just take a bit of thinking about exactly what flag is turning on what right now. I know Hillel's done some work to default enable all the flags, which is great. But if we're doing that, then I want the outcome of that to be that we can do everything except for instrument a project using the managed stack. I don't know if that is what will happen right now. I don't think it is.
Okay. Yeah.
Rob, that was the outcome, wasn't it? But if we enable those flags, the managed stack just becomes available for everyone, right?
Yeah, our UI, and Jan and Elwin can correct me if I'm wrong, but our UI is managed with bring your own cluster tacked on afterwards, after the fact. So managed is the default state. So if we want bring your own cluster to be default state, then we're going to have to do some UI flag checks and swap things around a little bit. It's not hard, from a development point of view, it'd be a couple of days work probably, but it is something we would have to alter if we weren't releasing both at the same time.
So I guess my question is like, what happens if we enable product analytics billing right now? Like, can we enable it without the SKU in the system in Zora in production?
If we enable it right now, what will happen? Good question.
Because
I
the reason,
I think
sorry.
stuff will break, but I don't know.
Okay. The reason I ask is because like, at least from my understanding of like the user flow is that if they need to pay for something, but they have no way of paying it and it's a manual process anyways, that achieves the overall end effect without us having to swap flags around or
Okay.
to spend the additional days of work, right? So I don't know if we can
Right.
add some additional safety checks to just enable managed offering, even and give it like a bogus SKU or just no SKU at all to say, hey, you can't use this unless you pay for it, or you bring your own cluster, which I
Okay.
feel like achieves the intended effect the same
I
way,
think
at
that will
least.
probably work then. As long as you're happy that that call to action is, go and speak to someone who would tell you that it's not ready yet. That should work. The billing flag itself, all that does is allow customers dot to provision the add-on, but if no one's buying the add-on, then no one's having it provisioned, and that's fine. That sounds like it should be doable. I can't see why not. I'll need to check exactly because, as you're aware, there's a lot of flags.
For
We
sure.
need to make sure that they're doing what we expect. But yeah, if you're happy with that outcome, then I think that's totally doable.
A
So what
product,
would that look
yeah.
like from a customer's perspective when they actually click on that? Because if they click on it and there's nothing on the back end of provision and it gives them a 500 page, that's not good. If it gives
No,
them a here, talk to sales or talk to your account or someone, that's acceptable.
yeah,
What would that look like from an end user's perspective?
the latter. There is no self-service in terms of provisioning this right now anyway. So even in its completed GA state, they'd be sent to someone in sales to speak to anyway.
I see.
Yeah, that was all the work we did with the onboarding reflow.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like there is no way to automatically provision anything anymore other than bringing your own cluster.
Okay.
Okay, that should be doable. Leave it with me after this, and I'll make sure that that is what in fact will happen. But yeah, if that's
Okay.
our aim, then that's fine with me.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
go
the
ahead.
billing flags used to toggle that contract sales UI, which Jan is currently working on, I believe. So we will need that enabled for that user customer flow.
Cool. Does that address, Max, your concerns as far as the biggest blocker at this point?
I think so.
Apart from the actual approval process, which yeah,
Sure, but that's out of our hands, so that's fine. Yeah, it definitely answers some questions. As long as you're happy with that outcome, I'll figure out exactly what we need to do to make that the outcome. But I've got no issues technically with that at all.
yeah,
Have
Sam and
have we
Lindsay are
gone?
good with it.
Yeah, I'm curious, like the onboarding, since we're kind of like going up into the wire of doing this, like as far as testing this goes and like actually like going through a user flow start to finish with bring your own cluster and getting it well documented and making sure that like there's no weird hiccupy things where it is being more managed versus bring your own cluster. Like I'd like to see that because obviously if we're gonna go GA in like a week.
Yeah,
Sorry,
so
are you asking us to rerun the flow before we? I mean, again, we're like GA release versus launch 2 as well, right? But are you asking to run through it again before we?
Yeah, just make
say
sure
it's
that we
good?
run through it, like ultimately any sort of release testing, just to make sure that we're going through it pretty consistently and it is gonna be obvious what a customer can do.
Yeah, for sure, we'll run through it again. Every change we make, we'll go through a verification step. That's part of our development flow for sure. Dot, just for clarity, .com is using bring your own cluster, but we can enable the feature flags for a specific group. We can enable it for ultimate test group and then run through that entire flow again so we can see the sales CTA and then connecting another cluster to the project. So we will be able to, in production, fully verify that it's good to go before any
Yeah,
customer
yeah,
sees
yeah,
it.
yeah.
Yeah.
I just want to make sure we just, we've probably had it on .com for a while, so just
Mhm.
go through it from like clean slate. What does this
No,
look
for
like
sure.
for the user?
Yeah.
Awesome.
So in part of enabling this billing flag, we can just enable it for a specific actor and then run through it that way.
I'll test the production SKUs once we get them as well. I've tested them for the managed cluster, that is. I've tested them in staging and that works. But yeah, we can't test in production yet.
Thank you.
Sam, did you want to clarify anything around the GAs?
Yeah, so I'll vocalize my point in what is that 7A2. When we use the term GA, that's actually a bit ambiguous. So we should be specific in whether we're referring to the bring your own cluster GA, which is slated for 1611, versus the managed cluster offering GA, which is slated for once we get all the SKU approval work done. That can help remove some of the ambiguity when we talk about those two topics.
That's helpful. Thank you. Okay, I'll move on to the next thing then. This is just a list of kind of outstanding stuff for, I guess, pre-bring your own cluster GA. Well, yeah, specifically actually. So number one is public analytics stack, which Rob is currently focused on, but I know he would appreciate additional eyes. Would that be fair, Rob? While you're typing.
Not necessarily. So, step one is copying the documentation to public repository. The first MR's already had a little review. I've been keeping that up to date with changes that have been going in, as well as a lot of the draft MRs that Janice has been creating. So I don't see those being blocked. They all make sense. So I've been copying those details over. I have a second MR that's in draft, ready to go to remove all those documentation and update our private repository to point us to the public documentation. And in terms of the first MR, the only one I'm seeking final approval from is Basti, just because I'm making some changes to the task file because that currently makes references to our internal environment. And I just want to make sure that he's okay with that. If that's from last week. If I don't hear anything from him by tomorrow, then I'm just going to commit. And if we need to make changes, we need to make changes later on. The second part I want to say about this is we've got approval from legal for all the licenses, apart from Promtail/Loki. Don't know what the proper terminology for that one. I guess Promtail's the tool to send to Loki. I have put a proposal in on the short-term fix for that. That should be super quick to fix and get that ripped out of the public repository and make it so it's usable by us internally. I've asked for Halil, Max, and Sarabi's input on that. And if they give the go-ahead, there'll be 2 issues, a long-term solution and a quick fix. That's a one-line MR sort of environment change. And then after that, it is copying over our code into that public repo, and we're bare bones ready to go and enabling that publicly once Dennis, I guess, is happy that we're not really revealing anything we shouldn't. Further work that we can always contribute to if we're blocked by anything else is things like adding a contributor file, proper better readmes, sorting out our pipelines, because it's going to be quite an annoying little manual process until we sort out our pipelines to read from the public stack. But nothing blocking from GA. So I have all hopes that we can get this all done and dusted, this public analytics stack done by the end of the week.
Cool.
At least for GA purposes.
Yeah, the goal is just to make sure the customer can reasonably stand up and bring their own cluster. There will always be some iteration work and to polish things up and make things like we still have a lot of work to do after that. But as far as just being able to put it in, get it into the customer's hands should be the focus. But it sounds like we're in a good spot there.
Yep. I'm just going to switch the next 2 because C kind of relies on B. So Jan's working on the sales call to action, I believe, but tell me if that's not the case, Jan.
That is the case.
And then once we've got that, then we can look at if we enable all of the feature flags, including the billing one, making sure that that UI is, what you're presented with is both the instructions on how to enable your own cluster or a kind of a sales call to action that at the moment leads you to a sales executive who will say, not yet.
So how is the sales? Sorry. So how is the CTA going? Is there anything to call out here?
The CTA is a bit tricky. I've been looking into it all day, trying to verify whether or not the recent backing changes around product analytics billing will work nicely with our current flow. We also have stuff like the our GraphQL call to get the product analytics state because the backend is a source of truth, but we're making changes to the front end. There's a lot of edge cases that I'm busy checking, and I'm honestly still busy verifying on staging and locally. Just because this isn't something that we want to flip and then it breaks. Also, I marked it as at risk just because of the limited amount of time. It's basically just this week to get it done, and development can only start now because we've been working on the foundation for it to create the new onboarding flow for bring your own cluster and staging, and then also the blocking backend work to actually enable this.
Is there something we can add additional capacity to? Ellen, I know you're planning to take on the bring your own cluster docs, but potentially if there's a lot of edge cases to check and a lot of things to check with the billing and the back end and how it affects the UI, is this something we can add more people
Yeah,
to?
so I already reached out to back and folks to basically see, yeah, to just like ask a question about like a weird situation that I'm running into staging. I've also suggested that I think we can split out the bring your own cluster documentation from this issue, so that that's something we can swarm on, because that's already like a weight of 1 or 2 that can be knocked off. And then in terms of working on this, I'll probably schedule a call right after this with Alvin or Rob to get a second brain, because mine doesn't seem to be up to the task right now.
I'm almost around if you need me.
Yeah, so it looks like something we can swarm on. So a couple things there. Thanks for the update.
Okay. So yeah, next is feature flags. As I said, that kind of is semi-blocked by the sales call to action. Like I'd like to be in a position where we have enabled them all by default for the 16.11 release. But we have to make sure we're in a position to do so. So that's kind of waiting for the sales call to action, I think. Product analytics billing is a different one. I need to look at what exactly changes when we flip that. I don't think it has a great deal of affect front end, but I know it does affect some things in the front end, especially at the start of the onboarding flow. Next one looks like it's, oh yeah, I guess not applicable to the bring your own cluster GA for
So
Jensen to do.
are we, sorry, Halil, are you still blocked then by the billing SKUs, or is it really just the sales CTA that?
For the feature flags?
Correct.
Yeah, I mean, I would just like to know if you can like enable by default. That's the only thing. It's yeah.
Yeah,
I think we
the
can,
other,
right? Because it doesn't change anything from the like our current state, which is beta, which anyone can touch, right? So
Yeah, I already started like preparing demos. I think we can do this like enable to by default this. We said that we'll enable by default this milestone, and then clean up next one.
I think that's probably okay. I can't see why not. It's the billing flag I'm more concerned about, whereas the other ones are all enabled anyway. Right
yeah,
now.
if the current state that is anyone can sign up, and enabling all the flags by default keeps that state the same, then seems good to me.
Mhm.
And then your work with the billing thing will close that off as we do the release for BYOC.
Okay. And yeah, one of the other MRs I'm working on at the moment is making it so that just ticking the namespaces settings that you've enabled experimental features and beta features is enough to opt in anyway, which is fine for now. Obviously, not for GA.
Cool. I'm happy to speak to the Kafka stuff. It's not applicable to bring your own cluster unless we can give some guidance on how things can be sized, but that's also available in the Kafka chart itself. As far as managed GA is concerned, I'm comfortable where we're at currently. I have a couple more changes I'd like to make, but at this point, we've got enough headroom where I'm not particularly concerned about that, because it also assumes that we've got enough people using managed GA that is sending us anywhere from I think 3,000 to 4,000 requests per second, but we can go beyond that. I have plans, and I was going to sync up with Sarabi today to discuss it, but I'm working on putting together a load testing cluster so that we can get up to tens of thousands of requests per second to be able to actually really test things out and tune and break things. But I wouldn't point that at the .conf cluster, because we're obviously using that for other things. But yeah, overall, we should have a lot better hardening soon, and we'll be able to test that.
Quick question, Dennis. Are you going to use a testing library for us to be able to reproduce the tests, or are you just going to mock them up? And
so right now I'm working on standing up a Kubernetes cluster using Locust. If you're familiar with that, it does have a web UI. It does give you live stats on how different tests are working. we can, right now I'm just having it send JavaScript SDK events, but you could effectively use whatever you wanted. Or go through go to an actual example website or something like that. So it's really up to how we want to develop that over time. But right now it's just, I want to get events in. And I also, this is part of testing staging, is like, I want to get us back to verifying things on staging before we go out to things on production. So effectively, I'm going to try to break staging a lot more. Does that answer your question?
Cool.
It's in
Yeah, thank
Python
you.
for what it's worth, but the documentation is quite good. But yeah.
Always fun to work with Python sometimes.
Cool.
Next, yeah, vector hardening, again, not necessary to bring your own cluster GA, I don't think.
Yeah, I think that we can, I don't know, like it's not really a blocker for the bingo cluster, so yeah.
Okay, that's fine then. And then documentation, Jan?
I can speak to my point. I think a lot of the documentation changes is grouped into the CTA because we want to note down edge cases and big things that we don't support, like managed product analytics on self-managed GitLab. So once again, I think it comes back to my earlier point about splitting that out into a separate issue. Makes it also easier to swarm on.
Yeah, the reason I was looking at the BYOC doc specs, it seemed adjacent to the CTA stuff. But if there is other things on the CTA issue that I can work on directly, let me know.
That sounds good. It sounds like Jan will try to connect with you and Rob, and we can figure out if that's if you should take the docs or if there's something else to look at. Anyone else wanted to verbalize their points for F? Okay. Then yeah, just a quick check to see, how we're feeling about these different points and if we need additional support. So if we feel like any of these are at risk, I think we discussed the sales CTA and seeing how we can potentially swarm on that. But how is everyone feeling about what their DRI is for otherwise?
As I said before, public repo feels good. So I don't think that's necessarily a blocker, but I'll keep a running check on that internally every morning. And if I need to ask for additional help, I will call it out as soon as I can. So I guess it sounds like the only one that's most at risk that we need to prioritize is the sales CTA from everything we've spoken about so far.
Yeah, sounds
the
like we have a
rest-
plan for that too. So
The rest is all sort of technicalities. Like, I'm after this, I'll enable all the flags locally and see what it looks like and make sure everything's looking where it should do. But yeah, I think just that call to action is going to be the big thing.
good. Then I think relatively speaking, we're in a solid spot then. Let me know if there's any support I can provide for the sales CTE stuff to make sure that that has enough attention that it needs. Any other comments on that? All right. Well, we won't have enough time to do the billboard review, and I think we did a much more in-depth version of that anyhow. So we can skip that point. Jan's got to read only to check out his proposal when we have when we have the time to. Nothing in show and tell or the OKR update. We are making progress towards that, of course, with our bring your own cluster GA release. But other than that, are there any final topics, questions, or concerns anyone has? All right, then 5 minutes back. Have a good rest of your Tuesday and take care.